The white cop thought he ruled the street, a self-crowned king with a tin badge and the brittle authority that comes from fear, not respect. In his world, justice was what he said it was. But real life doesn't bend to his favorite cop movies. Not when the woman he targets is a black CIA agent, calm, composed, and powerful enough to make his arrogance tremble. In an era where uniforms conceal rot and power often disguises cowardice, what happens when someone who has true strength refuses to bow? That punch didn't just meet her face, it shattered the illusion he had of himself. Which state do you live in? And how do your cops behave when no one's watching? Officer Derek Mayer, white, decorated, rarely challenged, patrolled the streets of Riverside City, a district that wore civility like cologne. But beneath that polished surface festered generational prejudice, unspoken rules, and a culture that taught him to act before thinking, especially when the face before him wasn't white. That afternoon, the sun rained heat like divine judgment. Boulevard 7 pulsed with movement. Coffee shop chatter mixed with the occasional siren wail, the hum of engines rolling past and the distant buzz of a lawnmower somewhere. Everything seemed in order, predictable. Until it wasn't. Change came in silence. There was no explosion, no scream, just a slow tilt in energy. The kind you only notice when it's too late to stop. In mere seconds, the world around Officer Maher would stop pretending. Nia Callahan stepped off the sidewalk and into the street. Her pace was calm, precise. An oversized gray jacket shielded a dark sheath dress that whispered elegance but not extravagance. She moved with quiet purpose, and somehow that offended him. There was no crime, no call, no justification. Just skin and poise, and the unsettling fact that she looked like she belonged here. Derek's jaw tightened. His patrol car jerked onto the curb, sirens slicing through the air like an accusation. Lights flashed, pedestrians blinked and turned. His hand hovered over his Glock 22, not out of necessity, but out of ritual, of habit, of power. He exited the vehicle like a soldier claiming territory. No greeting, no question. His eyes swept over her as if she were a threat, though she hadn't moved. As if she were a case file he could close by appearance alone. Nia stood still. She didn't flinch. She simply turned toward him and waited. No words, no panic. Only a gaze that had seen this too many times to be surprised. Derek scanned her outfit, flat shoes, a crossbody bag, no bulk, no threat. But her simplicity unnerved him. There was nothing for him to grip onto, and so he made something up. "You're hiding something," he muttered, voice low but laced with venom. Nia said nothing. Her silence wasn't passive. It held weight. It unnerved. It didn't challenge him, but it didn't yield either. It was the kind of silence that exposed insecurity in men who relied too long on noise. He couldn't stand it. He lashed out. No warning, no procedure, no hesitation. His punch cracked across her face with a brutality that echoed down the street. People gasped. A phone dropped. The sun kept shining. The world, impossibly, kept turning. Nia staggered. Her hair slipped from its tie, curling against her jaw. Blood found the corner of her mouth, dark against brown skin. But she didn't fall, she didn't shout, she didn't touch the wound. She looked at him. And that look, steady, unwavering, held no hatred, no fear, no pity. Just truth. And truth was unbearable. Officer Maher froze. For a second his breath caught, but the years of ego, of being unchallenged, unchecked, praised for mediocrity in uniform kicked in. His instincts retreated beneath the shield of authority. "Back off!" he barked to the growing crowd. "This is a security stop. She's resisting." But no one saw resistance. They saw blood. And a woman still standing. Her silence frightened them more than any scream could have. Her stillness carried an ancient knowing. The kind that said, "This isn't new. And I'm not the one breaking." Nia raised her hand, touched the blood gently, then lowered it. She looked at it for a second. Not shocked, not angry. Just observing. Then her gaze returned to Derek. And maybe she spoke, maybe she didn't, maybe her silence was its own language. But something passed between them, something only he could feel. His throat moved. Just once. A soft swallow. The first time in uniform he felt like he'd hit something larger than a person. He'd struck a force without a name, a dignity deeper than anything he could destroy. Backup arrived. A female officer stepped in, touched Nia's shoulder. No cuffs, no questions. Just a quiet, respectful escort. Nia walked, not rushed, not shaken. She walked through the crowd of phones and gasps like someone immune to spectacle. like someone who'd been here before and had nothing to prove. Derek Mayer remained still, fists clenched, not in rage but in search of feeling. The heat beat down on him, the siren faded, and something inside him cracked, because for the first time he understood. He wasn't the one holding power. He had struck something he couldn't name. And it would not let him go. He sat in his patrol car, fingers trembling on the steering wheel. The scent of blood clung to his skin. Every motion felt foreign now. Reaching for the radio, shifting into drive. Routine became ruin. He'd seen fear before, smelled it, heard it. He'd tasted adrenaline and dominance. But this absence of reaction, this woman who gave him nothing, she haunted him, not with screams or threats, but with the terrifying silence of someone who had already survived worse. The radio crackled, but he didn't hear it. His ears rang, his vision blurred. And that stare, her stare, stayed with him. As if Nia Callahan had seen not just what he did, but who he really was. Officer Derek Mayer gripped the steering wheel harder, trying to rationalize the tightness in his chest. It's just the nerves, the pressure, the adrenaline, a psychological reaction. He told himself this again and again, like a mantra against the trembling in his fingers. But he knew better. The tremor wasn't from guilt, or from the crowd's stares, or from the phones that might have caught everything. No, this was deeper. It was the undeniable sensation that he had crossed an invisible boundary. That by striking her, he hadn't just assaulted a citizen, he had trespassed into something sacred. Untouchable. In the rearview mirror, Nia Callahan sat perfectly still in the back seat. Uncuffed, composed, regal. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers folded loosely. She hadn't spoken a word since the impact. Not a plea, not a demand, not even a glance of reproach. She didn't need to. Her presence alone reshaped the space around her. A smear of dried blood darkened the corner of her mouth, but she made no move to wipe it. She sat there as if the cruiser were hers, as if the entire moment were under her control, not his. And when Derek glanced up again and locked eyes with her reflection, he recoiled as though scorched. For the first time in his career, he didn't feel like the enforcer of law. He felt like a man cornered in someone else's story. They arrived at the back entrance of the precinct. The area shielded from reporters, away from curious pedestrians. 2 officers came forward instinctively, ready to assist her out. But before they could touch the door handle, Nia moved. She stepped out on her own, fluid and silent, like she had done it 1,000 times before. Each footstep echoed louder than it should have, as though her heels cracked something fundamental beneath the surface of their world. Derek trailed behind her. He should have led, issued instructions, dictated procedure. But the words never came. His throat tightened, his authority withered somewhere between the cruiser and the threshold of the station. Inside, they moved her to the intake area. No holding cell, no cuffs, just quiet glances and stiff posture from officers who didn't yet understand why they were uneasy. A young clerk sat behind the processing console, fingers poised over keys, oblivious to what was about to unfold. She placed Nia's hand on the fingerprint scanner, expecting a routine ping and identification result. The screen blinked, then blinked again. Red. No match, the clerk said softly, assuming it was an error. Let me try again. She wiped the scanner, realigned Nia's fingers, and ran the scan again. Nothing. No name, no license, no priors. Strange, she muttered, frowning as she pulled up the advanced biometric tools. Derek's skin had gone clammy. He leaned against the wall, yet arms folded tightly to hide his unease. The screen lit up, Alpha 7 scan initiated. That was no longer routine. Seconds passed, then the message appeared. Access denied. National clearance level 1 required. Report immediately to Langley. The room froze. A hush fell, unnatural and sharp. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to pause. Another officer reached for the landline to call the supervisor. But before she could dial, the precinct commander walked in. He took one look at the screen and the woman beside it. His expression tightened. Then, without a word, he grabbed the phone from the officer's hand and hurled it against the concrete wall. It shattered into shards. The entire room flinched. "Goddamn," he whispered, more breath than voice. "We just messed with the wrong person." He didn't yell. He didn't swear in rage. He spoke like a man who had seen the edge of a cliff he didn't know existed, and realized he had already stepped off. No one questioned him. No one needed to ask who she was. They all felt it. The shift in gravity. The realization that this wasn't about a woman being brought in for questioning. This was about someone untouchable. Someone who could erase them with a phone call. Derek sat down in the nearest chair, his legs failing him for the first time in years. His uniform clung to his back with sweat. He placed his hands on his thighs to steady himself, but they weren't trembling anymore. They were cold, numb. He watched silently as another officer, this time female, careful, respectful, led Naya into a private room. Not a cell, a suite. No orders had been given, no paperwork signed, but the message was clear. She was not a detainee. She was not under arrest. She was not one of them. She was other. The entire precinct, once a place of hierarchy and certainty, now stood still. Dozens of officers who believed they enforced the law now looked like bystanders awaiting sentencing. Derek couldn't move. He couldn't even swallow properly. And then, like thunder returning after a lightning flash, her voice from the car echoed in his chest. "You just did something you can't take back." She had whispered it, barely audible. No one else had heard. But the weight of it didn't require volume. It was truth spoken into his spine. And it rattled him. He looked up at the monitor again. The clerk had tried the scan once more. Same result. Blank. No name, no birth date, no residence, no blood type, no record of schooling, employment, hospital visits, not even a trace of civilian existence. Naya Callahan, if that was even her real name, was a ghost. As far as the government systems were concerned, she had never been born. And yet she had stood on that street, under the sun, and bled in front of them. A phantom in flesh. The clerk initiated another scan, this time pushing the limits of the system. Alpha 7, Protocol Omega Override, a process reserved for verifying identities of operatives in black classified programs. The kind that weren't supposed to be acknowledged even within federal circles. The screen froze, then blinked. A new alert flashed, access blocked, directive read, immediate notification, Langley. Not a suggestion, not an error. A command. Everyone in the room froze again, as if someone had fired a shot. The commander, normally calm, composed, rose stiffly. His mouth opened, then closed. He pulled out his personal cell phone, stared at the screen for 2 seconds, then hurled it down onto the stone tabletop. Glass shattered. He ran his hand over his face, sweat on his brow. "God damn it," he muttered again. Not at anyone, not even at her. At himself, at all of them. At what they had triggered. A cold, almost metallic quiet settled over the precinct. Everyone understood. This was no longer about a punch. This was about a strike against someone who could not be touched, and yet had been. And that mistake, made in a split second under the heat of ego, had set into motion something none of them could control. The system had no right to question her, not anymore. And Officer Derek Mayer felt it in his skin. A strange tingling, not unlike the flicker of static just before lightning splits the sky. The air in the precinct thickened, turning heavy like syrup, dragging every motion through unseen resistance. His breath caught. Around him, familiar faces turned gray. Officers he'd joked with at the coffee machine. Colleagues who had cheered his marksmanship scores, now avoided eye contact. They shrank inward, huddled in the corners of the station as if the very walls had ears. No one dared to speak. No one dared to even ask who she was, as though to do so might summon something ancient and irreversible. Derek recognized the feeling, not fear of punishment, but the cold, creeping certainty that something greater than the badge, greater than the precinct, greater than the state itself was now present. Something watching. And none of them were prepared to be seen. In the surveillance room, the monitors played back footage of the day's events on loop. Grainy images, timestamps, routine visuals. But the files tied to Naya Callahan were different. The system had rerouted them without warning, automatically encrypted the video feed from the moment she entered the building. Clips that seconds ago were available to every terminal now vanished behind a clearance wall. None of them had credentials to climb. A tech, young, overconfident, tried to override it using root access. The screen flashed. "This action will be logged and reported." The technician paled, pushed his chair back, as if the warning itself had weight. He didn't try again. Meanwhile, in the interview room, not a holding cell, Nia sat alone. The door was unlocked. No one told her to stay. No one dared to ask her to leave. Her posture was calm, her head bowed slightly, fingers interlaced loosely, eyes closed. She could have been meditating, or mourning, or simply allowing the system to digest its own misstep without her interference. A junior officer was dispatched to bring her a cup of water. He stood just outside the threshold for over 2 minutes, clutching the paper cup in both hands before finally bending down and placing it on the floor. Not inside the room, just barely across the line, and retreating like he'd approached a shrine, not a suspect. Then Derek was called in. Internal meeting. No notes, no paperwork, no one sat. He entered a room where the division chief, the deputy director of investigations, and a legal advisor stood in a quiet circle. No chairs. No pleasantries. "Do you know who she is?" the chief asked, eyes fixed, arms folded. Derek opened his mouth, but what came out wasn't explanation, only the truth. No, they already knew. But the admission still landed hard. What chilled him wasn't that they had expected him to know. What terrified him was that he had acted as though he did, as though his badge alone justified whatever came next. "We can't protect you," the chief said. Not a threat, not even a rebuke, just a statement of fact, dropped like a verdict. Derek said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The line had been crossed. Not a policy violation, not an ethics breach, but the kind of line where survival itself becomes uncertain. Some people, just by existing, rearranged power, and Nia Callahan was one of them. By the time dusk painted the precinct windows in long orange streaks, Nia was gone. She had not been released. She had left. No handcuffs, no signature, no escort in uniform. Just a black SUV waiting at the back gate, engine low, windows tinted. She stepped into it without looking back. Derek watched from a third-floor window, palms pressed to the glass, and whether it was the fading light or something deeper, his hand trembled again. Not from adrenaline, but from a question. Who is she? That question didn't just settle in Derek's mind. It haunted the corridors, pressed into the silence of the offices, echoed down the stairwells. But no one dared speak it aloud. The answer didn't lie in files or in the system. It lived in her silence. And somehow, impossibly, the very next morning, she returned. No, not to the station, not to a courthouse, not to a press conference. Nia Callahan walked down 4th Street just past 8 a.m., wearing sunglasses that covered half her face and a worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She turned into a building no one paid much attention to, a squat, peeling structure with a wooden sign that read, St. Rose's Community Center. It sat in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by cracked sidewalks and hedges overgrown with time. The windows were covered with children's drawings, crayon suns, smiling stick figures, blue houses that leaned slightly to the left. Inside there were no titles, no security cameras, no questions. Only children, many of them deaf. Kids whose ears had never once heard their names spoken in kindness, but whose eyes were sharp enough to see the soul of a person. From the first day she entered, not a single child feared Nia Callahan. No one asked about the thin scar that ran along the base of her palm. No one questioned why her eyes often looked just slightly past the moment, as if tracking something deeper than sound. They simply knew that when her hand rested on their shoulder, the noise in their minds quieted. Not silenced by force, stilled by understanding. She was never late, never loud, never talked about herself. Her colleagues knew her only as Nia. No last name, no resume, no family photos, no digital footprint. And yet, when she taught, the children listened as if she were speaking directly to the places inside them adults never bothered to reach. They learned not just sign language, they learned presence. And Nia, she needed no voice. Her silence became its own instruction, a new grammar of grace. Some adults were less receptive. Parents mostly, the kind who kept files, did background checks, worried about insurance. Who is she? They whispered in PTA corners. Why is there no record? Why does the center employ someone no one seems to know? But every time she entered the building, those questions melted like morning mist. And no one, not even the curious, not even the suspicious, could deny what they saw when she was with the children. Calm. Not a forced calm, a transferred one. They searched, desperately, endlessly, methodically, but the system gave them nothing. No online profiles, no birth records, no school transcripts, no work history, no fingerprints in any employment database, and certainly no digital trail. Yet the children adored her, and in a world where only children speak unfiltered truth, that was more valuable than any seal, degree, or ID badge. Once, someone had tried to listen in, leaned close while Nia stood silently in the hallway. They hoped to catch a phone call, a fragment of real identity. But she never spoke. Her phone, if one could call it that, was a relic. An old clamshell model, scratched at the hinges, no touchscreen, no apps, no SIM card. A ghost of communication in an age of surveillance. It rang for no one. It recorded nothing. It was, in every way, the perfect shield. A cover that never had to explain itself, because no one dared to ask. At the community center, no one reviewed her paperwork closely. Each month she submitted files, neatly typed, boxes checked, signatures aligned, every form flawless, no typos, no corrections, all seemingly authentic. But no one ever verified them. No one asked who the signature belonged to. Why would they? When Nia taught, children who couldn't sit still for 5 minutes stayed locked into her presence for hours. One day, a boy previously diagnosed with a nonverbal developmental disorder whispered to his teacher, "She knows when we're scared." The words stopped the teacher cold, because they felt true, as if the child hadn't learned it. He had simply known it. And the weight of that knowing ran deeper than science could reach. There was something about Nia Callahan that didn't feel like she came from the same reality. Each day, during the noon break, when the kids snacked or napped or lost themselves in coloring books, Nia would quietly ascend to the second-floor balcony. She never invited anyone. She never left a trace. There, by an old lavender pot and a weather-beaten wooden chair, she would sit perfectly still, back straight, hands folded, eyes closed, not sleeping, not distracted, not even resting. Just listening to something far away. Once the center's janitor passed by and saw her in that state. 42 minutes later, she was still there, exactly as he'd left her, untouched by time. And when she returned to class, her eyes glowed, not with joy, not with fatigue, but with something the janitor couldn't name, as though she had returned from a battlefield no one else could see. Her presence shifted the air. When she walked past, children's voices grew clearer, lighter. Even the noisy world seemed to hush itself in reverence. People noticed, but no one questioned it. Because there was no opening, no flaw, nothing suspicious to grab hold of. It was the perfect cover. Not because it had been engineered that way, but because there was nothing to attack. And while Nia sat on the second-floor balcony, motionless in a city that never stopped moving, another hand trembled across town. This one not from reverence, but from raw, educated fear. Rebecca Lynn wasn't new to secrets. As a senior internal security officer at the Federal Data Control System, her job lived in shadows, erasing records, sanitizing databases, purging inconvenient facts. She handled orders too sensitive for any paper trail. No jury, no judge, just a silent phone call, a nod from someone 3 layers above clearance, and a line of code vanished from American memory. But tonight, she hesitated. She had received an alert, footage flagged from Riverside, body cam data, audio logs, timestamps. It was supposed to be routine. But as she opened the file, the first still frame made her fingers freeze above the keyboard. A street, a crowd, blood, and a woman standing perfectly still, face unreadable, posture composed, eyes calm in a storm she hadn't started but had already mastered. Nia Callahan. The camera had captured everything. Officer Derek Maher's blow, the collective gasp of the bystanders, the children nearby shielding their eyes, and then that stare. Her stare. Not defiant, not broken, not afraid. It looked directly into the lens, not seeking justice, not begging for empathy, only watching. Rebecca had deleted worse. She had purged footage of an Army officer shooting an unarmed teen during a failed night raid. She had erased hours of interrogation from a senior Homeland official caught abusing suspects. Once, she'd removed all records of a hit-and-run involving the vice president's nephew. But none of them had made her stop breathing. This one did. Because this wasn't footage of violence. It was footage of the system recoiling, of power breaking its own rules, and meeting something it could not bend. Her screen flashed a red notification. A call came through. No caller ID, no voice, just 3 words, delete immediately, no context, no permission. Rebecca reached for her mouse, moved the cursor toward the permanent delete command. But just as her fingertip hovered over the button, the system log updated. A line of code appeared. Phoenix, do not interrupt unless authorized by program lead. The letters glowed in crimson. Auto-logged, undeniable. Rebecca pulled back, heart hammering. Phoenix, she knew the name. Everyone in her building did. though no one ever said it aloud. It was the ghost program, the one no one acknowledged, redacted in every document, hidden behind 7 layers of encryption. A myth buried in the intelligence community's deepest fault lines. Some said it had to do with psychological weaponization. Others whispered it was connected to deep cover operatives embedded for decades. Sleepers so deeply buried even they sometimes forgot who they were, but no one had ever seen that name appear on a live system log. Until now. And if Phoenix was surfacing and tied to this woman, then what Rebecca held wasn't just a video, it was the matchstick to the nation's dry forest of illusions. Her cursor hovered, 1,000 instincts shouted at her to press down, to obey, to finish the job. But her hand would not move. Instead, she typed a 3rd-tier authentication request, a last resort, one that hadn't been used in 5 years. It bypassed Homeland, skipped the FBI, went straight to Langley. It simply asked, requesting identity verification for subject Phoenix. Awaiting authorization. The system clock read 3:27 a.m. Rebecca stared at the screen and waited. Because she now understood, this wasn't about protecting a cop, it was about shielding the illusion. That the system still understood who it served and who it feared. The system blinked, then waited. Rebecca Lynn's fingers hovered above the keyboard, her heart pounded, the cursor flashing like a metronome of dread. The prompt asked for a reason. She typed, "Validate Alpha 7 security level linked to Phoenix." No response. 10 seconds passed, then 20, then 30. The screen remained frozen until a single line appeared in stark, pale type. Authentication acknowledged. Do not ask further. Do not proceed further. And then the screen went black. The system didn't crash. It withdrew, as though the act of inquiry itself had crossed into forbidden territory, one guarded not by passwords but by silence. She didn't delete the file, but she didn't leave it in any accessible directory either. Instead, she moved it to a dead folder, deep in the root of an archival tree, under a name that meant nothing, protected by a keyword known only to her and whatever part of her intuition had taken over. Rebecca didn't do it to rebel. She did it on instinct. Because for the first time in her career, she understood. Some secrets weren't buried to protect systems of control. They were buried because if exposed, the illusion of control would cease to exist. But not everyone is trained to look away. And sometimes, a single image, captured at the right moment, from the right angle, by the right unnoticed observer, can awaken a society too numbed by routine to recognize its own paralysis. That image came the next morning. While the city still blinked awake, its streets yawning into daylight, a social media post appeared. No video, no headline, just one photo. Taken from a distance, slightly blurred, framed unintentionally, yet sharp enough to hold truth. Nia Callahan. A streak of blood beneath her lip, her head high, her gaze forward. Not into the lens, but through it. As if her eyes pierced the screen and reached out toward whoever dared stare back. The uploader? A second-year journalism student, walking home. He had lifted his phone without thinking, capturing the moment seconds before he realized anything serious was happening. He hadn't heard the punch. He hadn't filmed what came after. But that stillness, that silence in her expression, stayed with him. He posted the photo with 6 words. She didn't flinch, she remembered. That was all, but it was enough. Within 6 hours, the image had been shared 500,000 times. Within 12, it had flooded every platform. TikTok edits, Twitter threads, Instagram reposts, even academic discussion forums. The image struck a nerve. Those who had suffered recognized it instantly. That face, that moment of poised, unspoken power. The kind survivors wear after learning that rage changes nothing, but presence can break empires. People who had never experienced injustice couldn't look away either. Because the image accused no one, yet somehow made everyone feel complicit. The hashtag #WhoIsShe surged to the top of national trends. Photos from the community center emerged next. Someone remembered her from a summer festival. Another parent had a blurry selfie with her in the background. But none of them knew her name, no last name, no tag, no traceable digital past. She existed like a ripple in still water, impossible to pin but unmistakably real. As traditional media caught on, the narrative mutated. It was no longer about police misconduct. That thread unraveled too easily. This was bigger. A black woman, struck in public, unidentified, unafraid, untraceable, and unbroken. It wasn't a scandal, it was an absence, and the void refused to be ignored. Veteran PR strategists scrambled, but there was nothing to deny. No edited video, no conflicting timeline, no formal statement to counter, just a stare, a photo, and a silence so loud the public couldn't turn away. But what shook the foundation wasn't the photo, it was an email, an internal memo. Subject line: Phoenix Protocol Review. Immediate, sent from the CIA Director's Office to Eastern Strategic Command. The message was short, direct. Convene Interagency Security Review. Include NSA, DoD, DOJ, Alpha 7 tier asset detected publicly. Risk of civilian destabilization if mishandled. Do not make direct contact with the target. Await instruction from lead program officer. Inside the intelligence community, only a handful of operatives knew what Phoenix truly meant. Fewer still understood why its encryption was so layered it could only be unlocked through biometric clearance from Langley itself. But one fact was clear to all. If someone trained under Phoenix had surfaced, unsupervised, undocumented, unclaimed, and began shifting public perception without lifting a single hand, then she was no longer a covert operative. She was a narrative. And she had chosen to rewrite justice in her own language. That single line echoed like a dropped glass in a crypt, quiet, but shattering. The CIA convened within hours. No press notice, no staff memos, no internal feed. Only 11 chairs occupied around an obsidian table inside an alpha-level coordination room whose walls resisted not just surveillance, but thought. Every person in that room had heard of Phoenix. None had ever imagined this day would come. A field asset, one of the program's earliest, most confidential candidates, surfacing on her own terms. No glitch, no extraction beacon, no deviation pattern, just one decision: step into the light. At the head of the table, the director of psychological operations cleared her throat. She spoke the question no one else dared voice. Do we need to retrieve her? The word retrieve, in CIA terminology, had nothing to do with diplomacy. It didn't imply an invitation or a dialogue. It meant removal. It meant disappearance. It meant erasure. Silence followed, until another voice, calm and cold, responded. The one voice authorized to decide. The director of the Phoenix program. She was older now, silver-haired, composed, eyes like wet stone, known only to a few by name. She had tracked Nea since she was just a code, a 16-year-old in a selection report, flagged not by grades but by psychological pattern recognition. She had watched her grow, vanish, and reappear. Now, after years in the dark, Naya Callahan had surfaced. And the world had noticed. She didn't answer immediately. Naya Callahan sat still, her spine straight, her fingers lightly interlaced on the table. She stared at the large screen at the end of the room, where her own face, captured in that now viral photo, filled the center. Blood on her lip, eyes forward. A frozen moment that had somehow cracked through the silence of an entire country. The image glowed against the dark room, like a flare against midnight water. She kept her eyes on it, unblinking, remembering the moment it was taken, not because of the pain but because of what she had chosen not to do. Then quietly she spoke. Her voice was clear, calm, unwavering. No. Another breath. For the first time she is choosing her own response, and I want to see what she chooses. A heavy silence fell. Across the polished stone table, agents from 3 departments, CIA, FBI, and DOJ, shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Each knew what she was, what she had been trained to become, but none of them understood what she was now. A senior FBI liaison to her left frowned slightly. If she disseminates any programmed intel, or worse, if she engages the public with the intent to stir unrest, we could lose total operational control. Another voice, this one older, cut in from the far end of the room. This isn't a strategic risk. It's a doctrinal one. If a single individual, unarmed, without a title, without court authority, can exert pressure on the system from the bottom up, then we no longer control the definition of order. The Phoenix program director didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, slowly. A tired, knowing smile. The kind worn only by people who've watched empires bluff themselves into collapse. That's exactly why I want to observe. Her voice carried the weight of memory, the steel edge of someone who'd read too many classified reports that ended with a full stop and a body. She hasn't violated any directive. She hasn't leaked anything classified. She hasn't harmed anyone physically. A pause. We built a framework for control. She's using everything we embedded in her, just not the way we expected. She's doing what none of us ever dared. Outside, the data storm swelled. hashtags, reposts, opinion threads, whispered leaks. But inside this soundproof chamber in Langley, the CIA remained still. No statements, no denials, no confirmation. A strategy of active passivity. The kind understood only by those who've orchestrated long-term asymmetric warfare. Sometimes doing nothing is the most deliberate kind of war. And Nia, trained to manipulate foreign leaders, to infiltrate thought through gaze, through gesture, through silence, was now attacking no one. She simply stepped into the system, stood still, and let it unravel. Langley does not fear justice. Langley fears losing the monopoly on defining what justice is. And Nia wasn't tearing anything down. She was forcing the structure to see itself, bit by bit. The very skills they had encoded into her, emotional control, reflex anticipation, psychological mirroring, the ability to plant doubt and seed perception, were now aimed not outward, but inward. And the architects couldn't stop it, because everything she was doing was legal, measured, constitutional. And that, above all, was what made her dangerous. It wasn't resistance. She didn't need to resist. It wasn't a threat. She didn't need to threaten. There is no response more terrifying than the calm of someone who was once programmed to become what the system itself dares not name. But not everyone understands that. Certainly not Derek Maher. The officer who threw the first punch in broad daylight still didn't understand. He buried himself in the righteousness stitched into his uniform. Clung to it like a raft in a storm he could no longer navigate. But no matter how many times he repeated the story, no matter how many internal memos passed hands, he hadn't slept since that day. Because what haunts a man isn't what he did, it's what he realized the moment after. 3 days after the incident, a note appeared on his doorstep. No envelope, no return address, just a single line, written in tight, deliberate handwriting, so neat it was unsettling. Meet me tomorrow night if you still want to sleep. No name, no time, no location. And yet, somehow, he knew exactly where to go. He didn't tell anyone, didn't report it, didn't bring backup, didn't activate his body cam. He simply went, like a man walking toward judgment, not as an officer, not as a man of law, but as someone who had lost the right to ask questions. The meeting place was an old cultural center at the city's edge, abandoned, silent, its walls still holding echoes of community events long past. The room had sliding glass doors, peeling paint, a long wooden table, and 2 chairs. No lights, no cameras, just silence. The kind that presses against your ribs like guilt. She was already there, seated, still, as if she had never moved since the day he struck her. "Sit," she said, the first word he had ever heard from her clearly. Derek sat, shoulders stiff, hands trembling slightly. He tried to speak, perhaps to justify, perhaps to confess, but before a syllable escaped his lips, she began. Her voice was low, almost gentle, like someone recalling a story not for drama, but to unearth truth. "Do you know when I first lost the concept of fear?" He stayed silent. "Kandahar," she said. "They hung me upside down from a steel beam, no whips, no knives. Just heat, blood, silence. They waited, watched, starved me, day after day, expecting a scream, a breakdown, a confession." She paused, but it never came, and that's when they started to panic, because I didn't need to fight back. Derek's spine tingled. "Do you know when a person becomes what others fear most?" she asked. Her eyes bored into him. "It's when they no longer need to raise a fist, when they can stand completely still and force you to see yourself. And you, Derek, are arriving at that moment." Each word struck like water dripping into stone. No rush, but irreversible. He looked down, hands clenched, chest tight, no place to run. Finally, she asked, "Do you know why I called you here?" He couldn't answer. "Not to scare you," she said. "Not to retaliate. I came to give you one last chance to truly see yourself." He stood abruptly, but his legs faltered. The doorway now felt miles away. He turned to leave, and her voice followed, not loud but inescapable. "If you step out now, you'll never sleep again. You know that." She didn't stop him, didn't look back. She simply said, so softly it nearly dissolved into air, "After tonight, I won't come for you again. I don't have to. What's coming? You'll summon it yourself." Her final words weren't a threat. They were a door quietly creaking open onto the dusty, locked corridors of memory, the kind of memories designed to remain buried. And as Derek Maher left that room, Nia Callahan remained, seated, still, alone. She didn't need to close her eyes to see the fragments. They came willingly now. Poland, 2012. The year her name stopped being a name. The year it became a file code. The Phoenix program's underground facility had no signs, no chain-link fences, no welcome briefings. Just a single, unmarked steel door hidden beneath a decommissioned textile mill. There were no instructors in white coats. The ones who trained them were men with hollow stares, ex-intelligence agents who had dismantled governments using only a sentence. Psychological warfare legends who had never pulled a trigger, yet left behind trails of resignations, divorces, and suicides. Naya had been one of 8, selected after a 2-year trauma index screening across 5 countries. It wasn't IQ that got her through. It was residue, the lingering pulse of injustice that hadn't broken her, the stillness of someone who had witnessed cruelty but learned to breathe inside it. People like her didn't flinch. They didn't fight. They absorbed. And then, when the moment came, they unmade. Not through violence, but through presence, so potent that adversaries felt exposed just by standing near her. Not seen, revealed. Colombia, Myanmar, Eastern Ukraine, she passed through shadows, never listed, never acknowledged. She didn't need weapons. The collapse always came from within. One glance, one question, one well-timed silence. And men in power found their empires turning to vapor. But there was one time, Yangon. The mission was simple: observe, infiltrate, instill doubt. A general suspected of orchestrating civil destabilization. Her role: shake his belief in the very walls around him. But chaos is never predictable. The protests had swelled unexpectedly: tear gas, shouts, stones, and then a child, trampled in the crowd. One of her team, Yusuf, moved on instinct. He went to pull the boy out. It wasn't protocol, it wasn't permissioned. And Naya, she had the authority to give the signal. To extract, to protect. But she didn't. Not because she was cold, but because she needed to know something. Just once, she wanted to see if the world would right itself without her intervention. It didn't. Yusuf was beaten to death, crushed beneath the boots of the very regime she had studied for months. The boy lived, but her closest friend, the only one who ever truly saw her, was gone. That night, she didn't scream, didn't weep, didn't report. She sat in front of a mirror, motionless, until morning, looking not for wounds, but for any trace of decency she feared had quietly left her. That's when she learned the truth. The most terrifying thing isn't violence, it's power. Power used at the wrong time for the wrong reason on the wrong person. She walked away from Phoenix soon after. No warning, no betrayal. She didn't flee, she disappeared. Like a ghost who no longer served, but never turned on her creators either. She drifted to places without records. Cities where names didn't matter, where people spoke through gesture, not decree. When asked what she was, she answered only, "I was once chosen, now I choose again." That sentence was not a slogan. It was a recalibration of her existence. And with that quiet defiance, the world around her began to shift. Not like dominoes falling, but like tectonic plates. Subtle, silent, irreversible. And now, miles away, Derek Mayer returned from that room like a man who had walked out of his own skin. The city looked the same, the walls, the sky, the traffic, but something fundamental had been pulled from beneath his feet. He fell asleep on the sofa, fully dressed, lights still on. But he woke to a world, slightly off, not broken, not hostile, just removed. His social media still existed, but no one responded. No likes, no comments, no messages. People who once tagged him in posts now scrolled past his name like it had faded. Even his girlfriend, her texts once predictable, bright, full of life, vanished into silence. When he finally called, her voice was flat. "I'm busy." Then click. No fight, no accusation, just detachment. As if some invisible thread had snapped, and the space where he used to be had been marked "Do Not Return." Then came the bank. His account was active, technically, but everything was stalled. A fraud flag, a transaction delay, calls went unanswered. Hold music became a loop. Nothing had been taken, nothing was obviously broken, but it all felt dimmed. Like someone had reached inside his data and gently pulled a shade down, not erasing, not punishing, just disconnecting. By noon, he tried to visit his gym. Routine. Simple. He swiped his card. The scanner blinked red. Account not recognized. The receptionist glanced at him, polite, professional, but offered no help. He wasn't banned. He wasn't denied. He just wasn't there. And that, more than any direct attack, unsettled him. He stood outside the glass doors of the gym, staring at his own reflection. Faint, hollow, like he was being slowly edited out of the world. Not with rage. Not with revenge. but with the same cold precision he once believed only belonged to people like her. Nia Callahan hadn't erased him. She had simply allowed the world to see him. And sometimes, that's all it takes, to never be looked at the same way again. The front desk attendant, once so cheerful, once so friendly, now pointed silently to a laminated sign. Account temporarily suspended due to unpaid balance. Derek Maher stared at it. His credit line was fine. There was no payment issue. But the screen didn't lie, and the way every head in that gym turned away, as if he were invisible, as if he had never belonged, cut deeper than any slur. He left without a word, not with anger, but with the stunned gait of a man watching the air turn against him. That night, he walked into his favorite bar, a place where the bartender used to greet him with "Scotch, neat," before he even sat down. Now, nothing. He sat at the end of the bar for 13 full minutes. No glance, no menu, not even eye contact. When he finally walked up to ask, a manager stepped over. Gentle, almost apologetic. "Sorry, sir. Someone else has reserved the seat you're in. Would you mind moving to the waiting area?" Derek nodded, didn't push, didn't protest. He walked out, not rejected, erased. As he stepped into the cool night air, two women passed on the sidewalk. One leaned in and whispered. The other laughed, not cruelly, not loudly. Just enough for him to know it was about him. That kind of laugh, the kind that strips. The next morning he received an envelope. No return address, no logo, just a contract revision from his department. A single-line note, temporary reduction in role pending internal review. No reason, no accusation. Just silence. At work, his login failed, his desk was cleared, his computer taken for maintenance. No one looked him in the eye. A colleague passed, smirked and whispered, "Getting used to the edge of the map yet?" Derek didn't respond. What could he say? This wasn't an attack. This wasn't disciplinary. It was something much worse. It was an erasure. So complete, it didn't require force. Later that day, he went to his usual coffee shop. The one where they used to start his latte before he ordered. The one where the barista knew his birthday. Today, the waitress looked up like she'd never seen him. "Can I help you?" He smiled nervously. Ordered. Pulled out his card. Declined. Tried again. Declined. One more time. Still declined. The waitress shook her head gently, without emotion. "Sorry. Looks like there's an issue with your account. We don't accept cash. You might want to call your bank." Behind him, someone waiting scoffed. The sound hit him harder than the words. He left. No coffee. No explanation. Just the quiet understanding that his name no longer cleared access. He returned to his apartment. Fumbled with his keys. The newspaper, usually neatly folded at his door, was torn, fluttering underfoot. A scrap of headline clung to his ankle. "How do we deal with evil when it wears a suit and knows how to smile?" He didn't know who wrote it. Didn't know which paper it came from, but it pierced, not as accusation, as prophecy. He stood in the hallway for minutes, still, watching his shadow stretch, long, ragged, thin like parchment. He wasn't being judged. He wasn't being forgiven either. He was simply being left behind. In the following days, people he once called friends began to retreat. A former coworker ignored his lunch invitation. A fellow patrol officer spotted him in the cereal aisle and turned the other way. No one said anything, but that silence crushed more than any courtroom sentence. Derek searched for answers, online, in private messages. He combed through forums, news threads, rumors. Every attempt felt like shouting into a sealed room. Nothing came back, nothing except space, cold, widening, endless. And then one night, he posted a video. It was shaky. His face was pale under poor lighting. People misunderstood what happened. You don't know what it's like to be in the middle of something chaotic. I was doing my job. There are different sides to every story. The video ran for 31 minutes. No profanity, no rage, just desperation. It was labeled incendiary and restricted before it reached 100 views. No shares. But the comments cut like razors. You don't need to justify. You need to disappear. One verified journalist wrote, "A slap cannot be erased by an apology." Someone else posted a freeze frame of him grabbing Nia Callahan's shoulder. Captioned it, "He thought he was the law, but the law can't save him from the mirror." The next morning, he found a thick black smear across the driver's side door of his car. No message, no signature, just a single bruise made of paint. He washed it off with shaking hands, tried to laugh, tried to forget. Drove to his usual auto shop. The owner, Someone who had once toasted beers with him on 4th of July stood behind the desk and said flatly, "Not taking appointments today." No eye contact, no smile, just enough coldness to make the point. As Derek stood there watching the man turn away, he realized this wasn't exile, it was extinction. A slow, quiet collapse of relevance. And the most terrifying part was that Naya hadn't done a thing. She didn't hack his bank, she didn't call his job, she didn't speak to the media, she didn't need to. All she did was hold up a mirror, and the world, seeing him for what he was, decided to walk away. Not with fury, not with fire, but with the kind of stillness that makes even monsters feel like they were never even there to begin with. Derek Mayer asked why. The man behind the counter, someone he'd once shared beers and stories with, just shrugged. "I don't want to be in the paper." He didn't say it with hate, he didn't need to. The words cut deeper because they came with no emotion at all, like a scalpel, long sharpened and finally used. Derek turned away slowly, trying to hold his posture, but everyone could see he was no longer walking. He was drifting. Drifting through a city that no longer saw him as part of its ecosystem. That night, Derek sat in front of his laptop. He opened the old police forum, a digital firehouse of camaraderie, where he once swapped stories, shared brutal laughs, celebrated retirements, mourned line-of-duty deaths, where he was called brother, where he belonged. His account still existed, but the post he made, asking for guidance, for explanation, for anything resembling a human response, sat untouched. He sent a private message to an old colleague, someone who once stood beside him during a shootout. "Hey, what's going on? Are you okay? Can we talk?" The message was seen, but never answered. 10 minutes later, he was removed from the group. No warning, no explanation, just gone. In that moment, it landed. Like cold water down his back. They didn't ban him from entering the room. They just erased the door. The next morning, Derek headed to the grocery store. The lights were on. No closed sign. The bell chimed softly as he entered. The cashier turned her back. Another staff member vanished into the stockroom. No one approached. No one even looked up. He stood there. 5 minutes, then 10. Eventually, a middle-aged woman emerged from behind the counter. She didn't look at him. She didn't speak. She simply placed a laminated sign on the counter. "System maintenance. No service at this time." Derek turned to leave, still holding a crumpled 20 in his palm. As he neared the door, a little boy standing with his mother pointed and asked, "Mom, is that the man from the video?" The mother didn't answer. She just clutched his hand tighter, steering him away. As the automatic door closed behind them, with a hush louder than thunder. No curses. No confrontation. Just the sound of absence. Each day felt heavier, not like falling, but like sinking. Doors didn't slam. They just stopped opening. Once he sat on the same stone bench at the park, a place where he used to sip coffee and read the paper. A woman walked past, leash pulled tight on her dog. She paused, stared. "I'm just sitting," he said, trying to sound normal. Her voice was calm, even kind. But finally, "I know. But you're not allowed to sit here anymore. No rule, no police, just exile without language." And every morning after that, he didn't wake from dreams. He woke from the slow suffocation of being peeled out of society, one averted glance at a time. Not with violence, not with outrage, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. Deleted messages, unreturned texts, the absence of pings, the heavy silence of uninvited space. He tried to post a statement, tried to say he was misunderstood, tried to explain. He recorded a video, face drawn, eyes dim. Voice steady, barely. People don't know the whole story. That moment, there's context you don't see. It was 30 minutes long. He poured every ounce of clarity into it. No screaming, no denial, just a drowning man reaching for dry ground. The video was restricted within the hour, flagged as incendiary, not removed, just muted, silenced. But the comments were still open. "You don't need to justify. You need to disappear." She didn't fight back. That's why you hate her. You hit a mirror and got scared of what you saw. Someone posted a screenshot. The moment his hand grabbed Nia's shoulder. Captioned, "He thought he was the law, but the law isn't afraid of silence." The next morning, his car had a smear of black paint across the driver's side door. No words, just a thick streak, like a bruise. He scrubbed it off. Tried to pretend. Drove to his usual mechanic. The shop owner, a man who once toasted beers with him, stood at the edge of the lot. Didn't wave, didn't smile. "Not taking appointments today." And that was it. He didn't explain, didn't accuse, just closed the door gently, tenderly. On the life Derek once knew. Derek asked, "Why?" The man just shook his head. "I don't want to be in the paper." It wasn't rejection, it was self-preservation. And Derek realized he wasn't toxic because of what he did. He was toxic because everyone else saw what he refused to see. He walked on, not angry, not proud, just a man slowly evaporating. Later that week, he got an email from a nonprofit he donated to. "Thank you for your interest. At this time, we are not able to accept anonymous donations from individuals associated with public controversy." No name was mentioned, but none was needed. Everyone knew. One afternoon, walking downtown, he passed a small t-shirt shop. A display rack held a shirt with a silhouette, a man with his hand raised to strike. Beneath it the words, "You're not the law, you're just loud." He didn't stop, didn't flinch, but inside something dropped and never came back. At that same moment, somewhere in the corner of a dusty cafe, a surveillance camera caught a figure in the shadows. Nia Callahan, phone in hand, eyes calm. She wasn't triumphant, she wasn't vengeful, she was just still. The kind of stillness that cracks marble. Because she understood something the system never taught. Justice doesn't have to punish, it only has to reveal. And when a man sees what he truly is, unfiltered, unarmed, unneeded, it doesn't matter who cancels him. He cancels himself. And that's how Derek Mayer began to disappear. Not from the world, but from his reflection. A young mother in the Southern District was folding laundry as her daughter played with a plastic truck near her feet. The soft light of dusk crept through the curtains. She absent-mindedly scrolled through her phone until her fingers froze mid-swipe. The image, slightly blurred but unmistakable, appeared in her feed. Derek Maher. A face she hadn't seen in 5 years, but would never forget. Her throat tightened. She stared for several seconds, then turned to her husband and said, quietly but sharply, "That's him. It's him, the one who made me kneel, in front of our daughter, on the roadside." The husband's expression darkened. He didn't ask for more details, he already knew. He'd held her afterward when she cried silently in the kitchen, ashamed. Ashamed for existing, for asking for help, for being seen as less than human. He stood, opened his phone, and began to type. Just a short post. A photo. A few lines. In another time, it might have passed like wind through leaves. But not this time. Because during her night shift break, a cashier named Rosa, who worked in a 24/7 mart near the old downtown strip, read that post and stopped breathing for a moment. She couldn't recall Derek's name. But she remembered his voice. She remembered the sharp jab of a pen against her forehead as he sneered, "Say my name properly." It was over a receipt, over a syllable she had mispronounced. She had apologized, he hadn't accepted. It kept her awake for a week. Afraid she might run into him again, afraid of how small she felt afterward. She didn't write a post, she didn't rant. She simply shared the young mother's story and added a single line, "I know how you feel." That was all it took. It wasn't outrage that sparked the storm, it was recognition. And from there, the echoes began. A second-year med student scrolling during a late-night study break stopped when he saw the thread. His hands trembled. He remembered, with precise clarity, the time he was handcuffed outside the university library, walking in the wrong direction as a patrol unit passed. He had told himself for years it was an honest mistake, that maybe he had looked suspicious. But now, seeing the other stories, he realized, I wasn't an exception. I was just another dot in a pattern. He recorded a 1-minute video. Just him, staring into the camera. No anger, no tears, just cold, surgical truth. The kind you learn from dissecting bodies and watching systems fail under pressure. The video spread like smoke, 500,000 shares in 24 hours. Not because he was famous, but because people saw a sliver of themselves in it. And then it began happening everywhere. In a dusty corner of a forgotten community forum, once used to swap recipes and post about lost pets, a chilling thread appeared. Derek Mayer, veteran officer or expert in humiliating the helpless. There was no campaign. No coordinated push, just people, telling their stories. Someone posted about being forced to sign a blank ticket under glaring high beams. Someone else recounted being pulled over with no reason, except, "Your face looks too nervous." No rage, no threats, just story after story. A quiet courtroom with no judge and no defense. Until suddenly, the education community felt it. A middle school teacher who had taken her students on a field trip years ago remembered the moment Derek approached. No permit? Disperse now. And when she hesitated, he grabbed her badge and tossed it in the mud. She posted the photo, captioned it, "I didn't cry because he insulted me. I cried because my students saw it happen." Her former students flooded the comments. One wrote, "I thought you were weak that day, but now I see, you were just hurt too soon by a broken system." The muddy badge photo became a symbol. A new campaign was launched online. We remember the quiet ones. Victims shared small humiliations, moments that didn't make headlines, moments that didn't bleed but left permanent scars. Even the local coffee chain near the precinct, a place where officers once got discount refills, quietly removed their special tags. No press release. No boycott. Just a note at the counter, handwritten in red ink, "Respect cannot be demanded, it must be grown from trust, not fear." A local paper picked up the gesture. Headline, "Even a cup of coffee knows when to refuse coercion." That article was clipped and shared thousands of times. Then the murals began. A group of street artists known for peaceful landscapes and abstract skies unveiled something different. A shadowed portrait of Derek. His profile half-lit, the rest swallowed in grayscale. And next to him, painted in stark red, "When power no longer reflects humanity, it becomes a monster." It wasn't the art that made it viral, it was the recognition. That face. They had seen it in real life, in their neighborhoods, on their streets. No one told Derek to stop walking the sidewalks. No one posted a warning to stay away, but he could feel it. With each step, shadows didn't move like before. They whispered now, "I've met you. You pinned me to the pavement and never asked why." And worse. He knew something deeper. Once collective memory is awakened, it doesn't fall asleep again just because you hide. It watches, it breathes, it records. Like oil on water, it spreads, retelling itself without permission. One small spark, a face, a moment, and a system begins to unravel. Not from protest, not from war, but from witnessing. And so Derek understood, some truths don't need proof, they only need a reminder. And the people who once forgot were now the loudest to remember. Not to punish him, but to reclaim the voice he once stole from them. To tell the stories they buried so deep, they had forgotten how much they hurt until now. In the weeks that followed, Riverside didn't riot. There were no fires, no smashed windows, no protest signs blocking traffic. The city remained outwardly calm, deceptively ordinary, its streets humming with morning routines, children rushing into schools, dogs tugging on leashes. But something deeper stirred beneath it all. Something slow, dense, inevitable. Whispers, conversations, changes in how people looked at uniforms and each other. The first to feel it were those who had stood and watched the punch. A barista named Kevin hadn't said anything that day. He'd been on break, sipping iced coffee behind a shaded kiosk. He remembered thinking that looked wrong, but told himself he didn't see it. Now he couldn't stop seeing it. In dreams, in brief silences between customers, in the heavy pause whenever a patrol car rolled by. He started watching the footage over and over. It wasn't online anymore, not really. The official clips were taken down, but fragments lingered. A 7-second screen recording, a blurry GIF, that still frame, Nia's blood, her composure, that gaze. He hadn't intervened, and the silence in him now wasn't guilt, it was corrosion. Quiet, unrelenting. His girlfriend asked him, one night as they lay in bed, "Would you say something if it happened again?" He didn't answer right away, because the truth was too fragile. Across town, the female officer who had touched Nia's shoulder that day found herself rewriting her report. Not to change the facts, but because she couldn't bear how little she had written. Subject did not resist. That line mocked her. Nia hadn't resisted because she was past resistance. She had transcended it. And that shook her more than any act of defiance could have. The officer began to question everything. Her training, her instincts, her silence. She reviewed her past stops, thought about every woman of color she had cuffed without asking more questions. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror one night, whispering, "What if I'm not the good one?" No one had called her racist. No one had protested her name. But she felt exposed. And that was the shift. The power of what Nia did was not in confrontation. It was in exposure. Each person who had been part of that day, even peripherally, felt a reckoning rising inside them. It wasn't always loud, but it was there. in the way their hearts beat faster when they saw her image, or in how they began to edit their own memories. Like Detective Sawyer, who had been in the surveillance room, he had seen the system encrypt itself. He had heard the phrase, "program lead," for the first time in his life and felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. He requested a reassignment the following month. Not to punish himself, to distance himself from what he now understood. There were layers of power that could not be touched, only obeyed. And he had been on the wrong side of one. Even civilians, random onlookers, began to remember their pasts through a new lens. A high school English teacher, Ms. Riley, who had never thought of herself as political, stood in her kitchen one afternoon and broke down crying. Not because of what happened to Nia, but because it reminded her of something she saw at 13. A woman was pulled from a bus, slammed onto the hood of a police cruiser. Her father had said, "Don't get involved." And she hadn't. Now, 30 years later, the weight of that silence had returned. She began every class with a new prompt. What do you see when someone does nothing? And the essays her students wrote, raw, confused, honest, spread beyond her classroom. They were published in the local paper. They went viral because a generation was waking up. Not because they had seen violence, but because they had witnessed what dignity looked like when struck and still standing. One student wrote, "I don't want to be famous. I don't want to go viral. I just want to be the kind of person who moves when others freeze." Another? She didn't hit back. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. And that's what haunts me, that I've never seen power look like that. Even inside law enforcement, murmurs began, whispers in locker rooms, uneasy glances in morning briefings. A younger recruit was overheard saying, "What if she wasn't an asset? What if she were just a woman? Would we still be talking about it?" No one answered, because no answer would have made them feel clean. The badge began to feel heavier, not tarnished, but burdened. Burdened with the question, what happens when the system no longer defines justice, but is asked to serve it? In quiet rooms, in homes, in precincts, in classrooms, in coffee shops, the echoes of that one moment, the punch, the stare, the stillness, continued to ripple. Not as a protest, not as a riot, but as awakening. And the most dangerous kind of change is the one that begins in silence, because it cannot be undone with noise. The city never named a street after her. There were no statues, no parades, no medals handed out in secret, no official statements recognizing what had happened that day on Boulevard 7. But everyone remembered, not as history, as a mirror. In the months that followed, policies were reviewed. Departmental memos were rewritten in softer fonts. Training modules were updated to include sections on implicit bias, de-escalation, and community partnership. But the real change didn't live in the slides. It lived in the pause. The extra second a hand waited before reaching for a weapon. The breath taken before shouting a command. The quiet step back instead of forward. These weren't laws. They weren't orders. They were echoes. The mayor held a press conference one day, answering questions with polite vagueness. "We are committed to learning from recent events," he said. Not naming her, not denying her, because no one wanted to name the shadow they now lived in. But children did. They painted murals, not of her face, but of her posture, still, upright, unyielding. One wall bore a simple phrase, "She didn't speak, but we heard her." A new generation carried her without ever meeting her. Somewhere in a small classroom, a young deaf girl spelled out NIA in sign language without knowing why her hands shook while doing it. Somewhere in an underground intelligence chamber, a field agent opened a black file titled Phoenix and found a single line inside, "Observe. Do not engage." In a distant town, a man named Derek Mayer moved into a one-bedroom rental near a rail line. The walls were thin. The noise is louder. No one knew him. No one cared. And that anonymity, once what he feared, was now the only thing he craved. He never applied for reinstatement. He stopped speaking in public. He took up painting, though he never showed his work to anyone. Only one canvas ever stayed on the wall. A single red smear, across a field of gray. He never explained it, because he didn't need to. Across the city, Nia Callahan walked through the park near St. Rose's just before dusk. She wore no sunglasses, carried no bag, didn't flinch when a jogger recognized her and slowed. He didn't speak, he only nodded. She nodded back. Some truths don't need confirmation, they just need space. Nia didn't need to stay. She could have disappeared again, could have chosen another identity, another silence, but she remained, quietly, deliberately, not to be seen, but to remind the world what it looks like when someone refuses to be erased. And in that stillness, a new story began. Not about justice delivered, not about revenge served, but about power when it chooses to stand and not strike. Because sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't to speak, it's to stay. And let the world echo back its own reflection.